Hello and welcome back to a brand new DNF1 F1 podcast. I hope that you're all well and thank you once again, as always, for being here. It's very much appreciated. Glad to have you along for a bit of F1 discussion as we're here to preview the Hungarian Grand Prix. And of course, as always, with all of our race previews and reviews, we are joined by the DNF1 panel to talk F1. This evening, we're joined by Courtney Pine. Lee's not available, unfortunately, as he's away for a well-deserved break, but nevertheless, we've got plenty to talk about, and we've got plenty of panelists with us to get stuck in with all of that. Courtney, first of all, let's touch base with you, mate. How are you doing? You okay?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Sorry, you're only stuck with me this week, but I'll do my damnedest to complete the void that Lee has left behind today.
Yeah, absolutely. We miss him dearly, but I'm sure he'll be back to grace us with his F1 opinions and perspective very, very soon. But of course, every now and then, it's not too bad to have the OGs on for DNF1 every now and then. And of course, speaking of OGs, we got plenty to talk about going into this Hungarian Grand Prix. I know many of you guys will be listening in thinking, oh, here we go, another preview. I wonder who's going to win this Grand Prix. But of course, whilst F1 may be a little bit more predictable in this era of dominance with Red Bull, every now and then we get the odd curveball or something new happens to make things a little bit interesting. And of course, I think the first place we need to start, Corny, with this preview is Daniel Ricciardo coming back to F1. Now, for those of you who weren't aware, we recorded a podcast with F1 journalist Sam Coop from Formula Nerd. It was a great discussion on the return for Daniel Ricciardo, what we thought was going down there, our thoughts on the news and what it could mean for Red Bull going forward. So, Courtney, let's start with you, mate. What are your thoughts reacting to the Daniel Ricciardo news?
I think first of all, the fact that Daniel Ricciardo even dropped out of the F1 grid in the first place, I think it's very easy to focus on the negative surrounding that. But I think it's actually a reflection on how strong the grid that we have right now. In my opinion, I think this is the strongest F1 group we've had for at least 20 to 30 years. And I think that needs to be celebrated. And it seems that Daniel's put a lot of work into it. It seems like he's put a lot of work into the his sim work, which I think has been a highlighted flaw of his in the past. He hasn't put enough effort in behind the scenes. But now it seems like he's put more effort in and he wants to come back stronger and to prove that there's a lot of life in him still. And let's not forget that Daniel's still only in his early 30s. So he's now in his prime F1 years. So I hope for the sport, I think the sport is a better place for when Daniel's around. So I'm really hoping he kicks on. And I'm also intrigued to see if Daniel's problems were McLaren related, whether, you know, the way the car was designed, the concept of that car play to Daniel's weaknesses. So I'm very intrigued to see how he gets on at Alpha Tauri.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, the word of the day on that is Daniel Ricciardo ready? That is the question. How do we expect him to perform this weekend? He has been very, very confident about his chances this weekend. He claims that he feels very at one with the Alpha Tauri, despite the fact that over the years, Alpha Tauri, you know, despite being a Red Bull junior team, have often tried to distance themselves away from the senior team, not necessarily from a branding perspective, but also the characteristics of their car. So you wouldn't necessarily assume that Ricciardo will just go from doing the sim work and the tyre test in the Red Bull from this season, jump into the Alpha Tauri and treat it like a duck to water. There is going to be some calibration and some time where he will have to get used to this car. Overall, Courtney, how do you think he's going to do this weekend? Will he be as ready as he claims to be, or will these next few races before the summer break serve as a bit of a teething period so that he can get used to it, and then perhaps we'll see the real Daniel Ricciardo after the summer break?
I think the analogy you used there about a duck to water is going to be the biggest question mark. Is it going to be a duck to water, or is it going to be, you know, a duck falling in a pool of toffee? And anyone who has ducks knows that'd be awfully messy for both ducks and for everyone who needs to clean it up. There's just my farmer talk going on there.
Yeah, I was going
So
to
yeah,
say, you're going to have to, I mean, just to cut it there for a second, any of our listeners that do know a thing or two about ducks and understand the reference, do let us know in the comments. Like, get involved. We need to have a segment for some duck chat with Courtney on this podcast. So if you are a duck aficionado and get involved.
We've got a lot of ducks at Mud Shoot, so I know the animals inside out. So we want Daniel to be a watery duck, not a duck that's covered in toffee.
A watery duck rather than a toffee duck. I think we're going to have to use that a few times just so that it sticks. No pun intended, of course. But yeah, I think it's important to urge on the side of caution here because obviously we're all excited that Daniel is coming back. I, for one, didn't expect Daniel Ricciardo to return to Formula One, especially so soon. And, you know, it's easy for us to get carried away with expectation and hope, could this be the narrative for the second half of the season? You know, Daniel Ricciardo coming back to Red Bull was a marketing ploy more than anything else, but he was there as a reserve driver. And a lot of people, some cynics, of course, probably felt that this was Red Bull's way of keeping Perez on his toes. You know, they didn't have an obvious replacement lined up within the Red Bull program. It's fair to say Tsunoda's not quite ready yet. Liam Lawson obviously isn't in Formula One yet. His time will surely come eventually. And evidently, as we've seen, Nick de Vries was never going to quite make the grade in that regard either. So, you know, fast forward halfway through the season, Daniel Ricciardo is now back. A lot of people are going to be hoping, at the very least, even if they're Red Bull fans, that Ricciardo coming back is going to serve as a stark warning to Perez to either improve his form or maybe Ricciardo will show he's still good enough to jump into that Red Bull for 2024. So, whilst all that excitement is there, as I said, I think we need to urge on the side of caution here. I don't think we need to get too carried away. If Ricciardo's not up to the level of Tsunoda straight away, let's not panic. But this is a real opportunity now for Ricciardo to really prove himself. But at the same time, we do have to stress that if he's not able to live up to Tsunoda's level for the rest of the season, it could very much be curtains on his career.
Yeah, it could work out either way. I think it's like a last ditch audition, isn't it? Really, which is strange because this guy is, you know, has won multiple races, as you know, challenged and beaten the best drivers with, you know, he's diced with the likes of Alonso, Vettel, Lewis, and has held himself fairly well most of the time. So that's what I mean. It's not like he's any old slouch, but you are right. You know, with F1, particularly in the way these cars are developing fairly rapidly, you need to give him a little bit of time. But I was actually going to ask you. I wonder if Sergio Perez would be worried about Daniel's move to Alpha Tauri. I think we're going to eventually see them come on the track because when Sergio Perez, this is me being a bit cheeky. Don't come at me in the comments. When Sergio Perez inevitably starts behind Daniel Ricciardo because he has a bad qualifying, we'll see them dicing on track. So we might get a few opportunities to see them to duel.
I mean, could you imagine that? I mean, what are the odds this weekend that Perez has another stinker in qualifying and he ends up being out-qualified by Ricciardo? I mean, what are the realistic expectations here for AlphaTauri? Because let's be honest, even though it's Daniel Ricciardo, and let's assume we're getting the best Daniel Ricciardo back, the one that we saw at Renault for a few years and Red Bull when he was winning those races, perhaps a decent level Ricciardo like we saw in the first year McLaren. If we get that Ricciardo, the AlphaTauri it's still going to be hard to believe that they can get themselves out of Q1. Now, of course, I'm not saying that's impossible because Tsunoda's very much done that quite regularly this season, so a Q2 appearance is more than likely at this point. But if you get a scenario where Perez has another stinker and Ricciardo out-qualifies him, all of a sudden, social media, pundits everywhere, they're going to love that story. They're going to feed into it. In a way, it's probably what Red Bull wants to a certain degree. I think first and foremost, they would want Perez to up his game, be at the front with Verstappen like he should be at the moment, and not have to worry about his race pace to get him out of trouble. They want Perez to be good. But of course, if Ricciardo proves to be the better of the two options, or even Tsunoda to some extent, it's not the worst thing in the world for Red Bull. I don't think Perez is too worried. I know he says he's not worried at all. He's been in F1 for 13 years or something like that. He's been there and done it. He's seen it all. But I'd be very surprised if he wasn't worried about the prospect of Ricciardo coming back into F1. He probably looked over his shoulder a little bit and thought, oh, well, he's back in the team. It's not really a big deal. But now he's in a car. It's starting to get a little bit more real. And I'd be very surprised if Checo hadn't, double took on this just to see, okay, he's there. I got to up my game and hopefully things will be okay.
I think this goes back to my original point, when I said about, Daniel dropping out of F1 altogether. But if you ever look at this current grid, I think if you're not Max Verstappen, Lewis Hamilton, Fernando Alonso, and even to the extent Charles Leclerc, I don't think you should rest on your laurels. I feel it's an extremely competitive grid. There are plenty of young, talented, and hungry drivers that would be after that seat of Red Bull. And even if Sergio was to drop out of Red Bull, how many seats would be available? So I'm not saying I'm not going to be. I'm saying this to grab attention, grab the headlines, on the old YouTube algorithm. But I'm not. I don't think he'll drop out of F1 altogether this season. But Sergio Perez needs to be very careful about retaining his Red Bull seat, and also look at Valtteri Bottas. I don't want to be too harsh on Valtteri Bottas. I did think that Valtteri would have more of a step up in his personal performance after leaving Mercedes, and that hasn't quite happened. And they're both at that similar age now, where the ambitions can struggle. He's been getting beat by his teammate fairly convincingly. And I just think this is a very, very interesting time for Sergio Perez and for Daniel Ricciardo.
Yeah, very much so. And, they are fortunate to a degree that in terms of the next drivers coming through the conveyor belt of the junior series, there's nobody. I mean, you could make an argument, I suppose, for Fred Vesti and Teo Porcher and Ayumu Iwasa to a larger extent, and of course Liam Lawson. Let's not forget about him. They are waiting for that opportunity. But I wouldn't exactly say there was anyone out there that was smashing down the door like a George Russell or a Lando Norris or a Charles Leclerc like they were in junior series a few years back. So they are afforded the luxury of not having too much pressure. But I think you're right, Courtney, given the level of the grid right now and how much depth of talent there is, that someone like Nick De Vries can just be chucked away and chewed up and spat out to the wayside after 10 races. It's crazy, really, to think that that's possible. But this is the Red Bull program we're talking about. They are ruthless. They have made those decisions for better or worse, and they will continue to make those in pursuit of finding the next star in their team, whether that be Perez, Ricciardo, Tsunoda, or maybe Lawson in the future. We'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, and I think if you have a look at the Red Bull, it's obviously the car to beat at the moment. So that seat's going to be particularly sought after. So we know that with success comes added pressure. So that's something that Sergio really needs to consider.
And Red Bull certainly aren't afraid to look outside their own program. That's how Perez got in. So yes, we'll have to wait and see. But guys, let us know in the comments. How do you think Daniel Ricciardo is going to do, and how is he going to fare this weekend on his return to F1? I know it doesn't seem like a long time, but 6 months outside of an F1 car can be a very long time. So be interesting to see how he gets on. So moving on to the next topic of discussion of this preview. Normally we do the predictions for this weekend, and we will do later on in the episode, but I kind of want to do a bit of a prediction going forward for the rest of this technical era that we're currently in right now. We're in the second years of this iteration of technical regulations, and a lot of it has been dominated by Red Bull. You could argue from the summer break, maybe even just before that, last season to this season, Red Bull have very much been in the ascendancy. And the question since then has been, who is the most likely challenger to compete with Red Bull going forward? F1 certainly needs one, and there are probably a handful of candidates at this point in time where you have Aston Martin, Ferrari, Mercedes, McLaren have suddenly re-emerged as a potential challenger off the back of what we saw at Silverstone. Alpine have always been, they've been the team in the midfield. Do they have what it takes? I'm not sure on a long term. But right now, realistically, Courtney, we probably have 3, if not 4 teams in the mix that are all cancelling each other out at different circuits and having good weekends and having equally bad weekends throughout this season, where Red Bull have been absolutely brilliant everywhere. In your mind, out of those candidates, Courtney, who is really in the best place to challenge Red Bull going forward in this new technical era?
I think the two candidates, obviously, some people will be like, oh, you're so predictable. But I feel the two candidates that really stand out to me are Ferrari and Mercedes. I feel that, obviously, let's run back to 2022. It seemed that Ferrari had the best understanding of the new regulations alongside Red Bull. So the they have a starting point. I feel that Mercedes, despite the difficulties they had, particularly last year, they're a little bit more mature along their development path as well. And I feel that Mercedes is getting to the point. I think Lewis Hamilton said himself after the British Grand Prix that he knows exactly what the problem is with the car. How long that takes to translate to better race results, time will tell. But I feel that Ferrari and Mercedes are sort of further along the understanding. And maybe that comes with the race winning experience they've had in recent years. We have a look to Aston Martin. They've made a good step forward, but I feel it's going to take them more time to solidify what they're working with. I think McLaren are going to be the most interesting moving forward, but I'd still believe that Mercedes and Ferrari are probably the two most likely to challenge consistently. I feel that McLaren and Aston Martin will be sort of more peaky, so they'll be more up and down. Whereas I feel like Ferrari and Mercedes will be more consistently close to Red Bull.
I think for me, you can't look past Mercedes. I think if you're going to pick one candidate, it has to be them. And look, Ferrari fans probably listening to this show probably look at me and think, Ad, why are you not backing Ferrari? I think that the simple fact is, every time we get a new regulation set, Ferrari, more often than not, are usually up there in the ascendancy, if not with the fastest car at the beginning of it. Over time, it starts to fade away for different reasons. And we saw this in 2017. For a large part of that season, Ferrari had the best car and could have won the World Championship. Probably should have won the World Championship in 2018. But of course, that didn't happen. And then in 2022, Ferrari looked like the team that had set the benchmark. They looked like they had the best car and everyone else was playing catch up. Red Bull eventually got on terms with their car and left everybody in the dust. And for a large part of last season, Courtney, even Matteo Binotto was saying that even if Ferrari had the unlimited resources that a cost cap era just doesn't allow for anymore to develop their car and pursue the right direction, Ferrari more often than not were scratching their heads and looking clueless as to what they could do to improve things. They've only now got to a point with this car where they're actually much more efficient with it in terms of the aero and overall performance with the floor and all the other bits that come with that, compared to where they were last season. They've only now just got into that position following the changes to the technical regs on the floor last summer break. So you take that into consideration and you realise that Ferrari, for whatever reason, they just cannot seem to keep up in this development race. And it's going to be hard for them to be that outstanding candidate to challenge Red Bull, let alone beat them. Aston Martin, as you rightly pointed out, I think they've done a great job with what they had so far, but I think they're starting to realise where they are limited in terms of resource. They're still sharing the Mercedes wind tunnel and simulator. They're not going to be online with their own in the new facilities they have until next season. So they're still pegged back in that regard. They've done a great job, but I just think their project is more long-term rather than short-term. So I just don't think they can compete on a level footing with Red Bull, let alone beat them, despite having the closest concept car to the Red Bull at the moment. McLaren, yes, I think McLaren are outstanding at Silverstone, but I do want to urge on the side of caution for McLaren fans, because Silverstone was a circuit that always was going to play to their strengths, and the upgrades on their car really helped that a lot. And I think at Hungary, we're going to start to see McLaren fall back a little bit. Not necessarily down the bottom of the field like they were at the start of the season, but I do think they're going to have a hard time to beat Ferrari, Aston Martin and Mercedes on a slower track, under braking. It's still a fairly laggy car in that regard. So, they are getting better, but theirs is more long-term as well. Then we get to Mercedes. The long story short, this is why I think Mercedes are in the position where they are most likely to challenge Red Bull. It's a car very good on its tyres. It's still very, very draggy at the moment. They have two very, very high-level drivers, arguably the best driver pairing on the grid. And judging by what Mercedes are trying to do here, it looks like their problems are the much easiest to solve out of all the teams. And they seem to be the most efficient team being able to solve that. I think people will come at me and say, look, Mercedes have struggled the last 2 years because they've gone the wrong way. They're about 18 months behind Red Bull in terms of their understanding of the right concept to go down. But that being said, they are still the best equipped team to deal with all of this. And to me, they look like the team that's going to be more likely to challenge Red Bull going forward, just because they're the best at being able to deal with these issues than all the others.
I completely agree with what you're saying, and another thing, and I have to say this with a real word of caution because as we're seeing this weekend, Red Bull are rumored to be bringing some upgrades. It could be up to at least 2/10 of a second faster, which is what the casual fans really want to be hearing. But
Oh
I
boy.
do, yes. So I'm going to try and go with a bit of good news here. I feel that the more competitive the battle behind Red Bull becomes, I feel that they will push each other. I think because it's going to be so competitive, I do feel they'll push each other to slowly but surely catch up with Red Bull. I don't quite know how long that's going to take, but I do feel that if a team isn't challenging Red Bull by the second half of 2024, I think some serious questions need to be asked about, you know, the direction that these teams are going in because we saw a couple years after the Mercedes dominance that other teams started to get closer. I know there's never a time frame on these things, but come on, it would be embarrassing for the other teams if they didn't start at least challenging Red Bull for race wins next year.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, people listening in are probably hoping for us to be a little bit more upbeat in terms of when the teams can realistically challenge Red Bull on an equal footing. But I don't think that's an unrealistic target, the second half of 2024. We just have to hope the ATR regs do their job and that Red Bull are going to be paid back by constantly being the number one team that has the less development time. But we often forget that whilst we're talking about the teams catching Red Bull up, Red Bull are still going to be making gains of their own. So, you know, then coming out and saying that they're going to be upgrading the car to the point where it has a 2-3 tenths per lap advantage on where it was at Silverstone, everybody's going to sit there and have a sigh of despair if you're not a Red Bull fan and just think, oh, great, like they're somehow finding even more time and they're going to stretch their advantage even further. It's amazing. It's so difficult to fathom, but that's the reality right now. They also said, Courtney, that this car is going to look very, very different, noticeably different. And I think it was Lee in the group chat saying, wouldn't it be hilarious if Red Bull decided to adopt the no side pods approach that Mercedes did, but they found a way to make it work? After all their effort and Mercedes abandoning the concept, it would just be heartbreakingly cruel and in a way quite hilarious, actually, if you're a Red Bull fan, of course, for them to actually master the concept that Mercedes failed. I'm not suggesting that's what's happening, but it would be hilarious if that was the case.
I wouldn't even rule it out at this point. I think that Red Bull have such a gap that particularly they look. We all know they easily have the best designer in Adrian Newey. He is very much the benchmark when it comes to aero design. But it just shows that they have so much time in hand that they actually have the time to tinker and play with new concepts. It's almost like they're so far ahead that they have time to do a few burnouts and still go on ahead and win the race. But it just goes down to a topic conversation that we often have, not only on this podcast, but in private conversation. It can be very frustrating when one guy dominates the sport. I was saying just yesterday that now Djokovic has lost to a Wimbledon final. We're now seeing a level of dominance from one driver, in which we're not seeing in any other sport at the moment. And even though for the neutral, that could be frustrating, you have to put your hats off to the job they've done at Red Bull. They've obviously, particularly with Adrian Newey in charge, once again, he's pulled it out of the hat. And we just have to enjoy the battle from second going backwards. And also, with Max Verstappen, the job he's doing. And I've been seeing like articles lately and videos about, the amount of time the guy puts in the sim racing. I often downplayed his achievements by saying that, he's only got this far because of his dad and the privilege that comes with that. But the guy is obsessed with sim racing. I feel you're putting that much time and effort. If sim work is your hobby, most other drivers are out partying, and with Lewis Hamilton, for example, he's hanging out with celebrities, doing fashion shoots. Max is on the sim. He's got his World Championship trophy next to him on the table, and he's doing sim racing. I just feel that Max Verstappen is the epitome of that generation of driver. That work pays off. He's doing it all the time. So I just don't know how long term. I don't know how other drivers beat that because he's in a world of his own.
Speaking of sim racing, did you see that video that's been doing the rounds on social media? Because I saw this a couple of days ago, and now it's started to blow up a bit more, where Max Verstappen was in a sim race, and I can't remember what it was for. It was for like red line, whatever he was driving at Spa. And someone went into him at turn 1 at La Source in Belgium, and he's followed this person all the way down to Eau Rouge and Radion, gone down the Camel Straight, and then he's absolutely taken them out at the end of the corner. I just followed them all the way to, what was it? Not Pouon. Trying to think. What people used to call Radion. Anyway, I can't remember the corner. Anyway, my memory's gone blank on this one. But yeah, did you see that, Courtney? What'd you make of that?
It just shows how Max Verstappen can be. But look, it's on the. I know people take the sim racing very seriously, but I'm not going to react to it in a way that other people might, because at the end of the day, like, nobody's lives are at risk. But I do see a lot of similarities between Max Verstappen and Djokovic. I think they're such fierce competitors. We saw in the Wimbledon final, Djokovic obviously lost a break in the final set, and he smashed the racket, and we saw a lot of criticism for that. And even though it's not the best way to conduct yourself, it just shows how seriously the guys at the top of their game take their work. So you don't want to be taking too much away from him, but there was that incident though where he did retaliate to Lewis. He thought that Lewis was blocking him on a lap, and he did retaliate and mess up one of Lewis's laps. So Max does still have that level pettiness in his actual F1 driving.
Yeah, I mean, with the sim video that we saw on social media, I mean, yeah, it was a little bit of, spitting the dummy out and probably a bit annoyed about that stuff. I'm sure a lot of people that are really into their sim racing would voice their opinions on it. I saw loads of people going, oh, well, he's an ambassador for this. He's a big sim racer. Lots of people pay lots of money for equipment and all that. And I'm thinking, okay, look, let's just calm down here. It was like that incident with Simon. Was it Simon Pagenaud when he took out Lando Norris or wanted to take out Norris? And everyone was losing their minds over that. And I just thought, like, let's have a bit of perspective here. I mean, are we annoyed at this because a famous racing driver, arguably the most famous sim racer in the world at the moment, has spat the dummy out and crashed into someone in a race out of rage? Or are we just annoyed because it's Max Verstappen? And it's another way to, attack him with something. I think it's a little bit of both, quite frankly.
Yeah,
I'm not gonna give him a buy on this and say, oh, it's only sim racing, it's all computer stuff and all that rubbish. Like, obviously, there is an element to this where Max has got to grow up a little bit and just like, look, these things happen. If someone took you out on purpose, it's annoying, but when you got that profile, I imagine loads of content creators probably have the same problem when they're doing stuff and people take them out in online lobbies. I get it. But let's not go crazy here. It's not like we're going to throw Max in prison or anything crazy. Like, if you did that in real life, obviously that's another thing altogether. Yeah. So, it's a bit crazy stuff. I don't know. Maybe that's just my opinion. I don't really do gaming that much anymore. So, I do miss it, but, what can you do? Let's move on to the next topic of discussion. Let's talk about Williams, actually, because we haven't featured Williams as sort of a central piece on this show in these previews. And I think we should, because a lot of what they've done this season, a lot of good things they've done this season, have very much gone under the radar. And we had a few questions coming to us, and one person asked, is it about time that we started acknowledging Williams as a solid midfield contender and finally, once and for all, put forward that they are no longer the backmarker team? I'm going to say yes, absolutely no longer the backmarker team. They are very much a team in the midfield at this point in time.
Yeah, I think the acquisitions of not only Alex Albon, but James Vowles from Mercedes as well, great additions to the team. And it does seem like they're on an upward trajectory. I'm not going to get carried away and say, yeah, they're going to join that group alongside the likes of Aston Martin, McLaren, etc. Even though I'd love to see that. The more competition, the better it is for the sport, given the quality of drivers that we currently have. But yeah, they're certainly taking a step forward. And I think we can agree, Adam, we're both big believers in giving credit when credit is due and actually be consistent. Sometimes we get accused of being biased. That's a whole different matter. But I'm a big believer in giving credit when credit's due. We were all very quick to make fun of Williams when we saw the simplicity, let's say, of their flaw in Monaco. But they're certainly heading in the right direction. And I think it's also good that we don't have a one backmarker team at the back. We often complain that there's only one team at the front. Often there's been a backmarker team. We saw it with Haas in recent years. Now we're seeing it with Williams. I think now you've got the likes of Alfa Romeo, Haas, even Alpha Tauri on a bad weekend to be looking behind themselves and going, well, look, we don't back up our ideas. We could end up right at the back. So the competition, apart from the team at the front, the competition is really building up in F1, and it just gives me plenty of encouragement in the coming years.
Yeah, it really does. And I'm hopeful for Williams. It's great to see what they're doing at the moment. I think James Vowles, as you mentioned, Courtney, has proven to be a very, very good team principal at this point in time. Of course, there are always going to be question marks about his experience and suitability for the role. Other team principals like Jos Capito and Paddy Lowe had stints there. I can't imagine either of them had anywhere near as much success in a short period of time as James Vowles has. Now, of course, it's all circumstantial. Williams hardly had any money or were on the brink of going out of business when Paddy Lowe was trying to sort things out there. They didn't even have a car for the first 3 days of testing at that point, so the writing was always going to be on the wall there. Jos Capito, there was a lot of investment there from Dorilton Capital, but it was very much a battle of what Dorilton thought they were giving to Williams, they thought was satisfactory and Williams weren't doing enough with, versus Jos Capito saying there wasn't enough investment and not enough resource to improve Williams. So, that was never going to work out, unfortunately. But now James Vowles has come in. He knows how a race-winning or championship-winning team works. He's addressing the issues at Williams that need to be addressed, and slowly but surely progress is being made. Still a long way to go, and it will get tougher the further along they go at this point in time, but they are doing a great job right now. And the rumours were going around regarding Alex Albon, whether or not he would be interested in the Red Bull seat or going back there. Rumours were saying that Alex actually turned that down because he's quite happy and very confident about this Williams project. Now again, I'm speculating here, but if that was true, that just speaks volumes about what Williams are doing right now, with someone like Alex Albon potentially turning down a future seat at Red Bull again, where he was before, because he wants to stay at a team like Williams.
Well, it just sums up really what we've already said, that Williams are building something, and sometimes you can look at drivers, or in other sports, you can look at players when they move from one club to another and they're thinking, it's one thing being with the best, but sometimes players or drivers like to build something. And it does look like Albon and the Williams team are building something together. And I think, again, the acquisition of James Vowles and how Albon has really settled into the team and kicked on, that really is a prime example of the atmosphere that they're building at Williams. And if Williams continue to, exude, let's say, that kind of atmosphere, it's going to start attracting the higher class engineers to help build that team. I don't know where they're at facilities wise. I still think that might be the biggest drawback of the Williams team. I still think they're still fairly behind when it comes to facilities. So they will still need to up that game. They can't just rely on the heads of the people that work for them. They will need the facilities if they really, really want to compete with the midfield.
Absolutely. And, Williams were, what were they saying the other day? They were like 20 years behind some of the bigger teams. And that is a stark reminder of how difficult things are for Williams at the moment. But in a cost cap era, they're always going to be bringing new technology in. It's going to be easier to compete against the bigger teams in that regard. So, if Williams are able to find the right investment and get everybody working together in the way that I think they are at this point in time, sky's the limit. We'll have to wait. It's going to be a long process, but I've not been this optimistic about Williams for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And that, not just my reference, but I think the reference of other people saying similar things there, that does speak volumes about the job that James Vowles and many people at Williams are currently doing right now. So long may that continue. So we get to this point in the episode now, Courtney, where we do our predictions for this weekend's Hungarian Grand Prix. And for those of you that are new, we have a set list of categories where we do predictions based on what we think will go down this Grand Prix. And we would love for you guys to play along with us. If you're watching this on YouTube, as always, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel if you are new, but get in touch in the comments regarding these predictions. We want to know your thoughts heading into this weekend's Grand Prix. And of course, if you listen on your favorite audio platform, don't forget to leave us a 5-star review, of course. It really helps us out a lot. But head over to YouTube, get in the comments, let us know what you think. So the first category, Courtney, the best surprise. Who's going to be the best surprise this weekend?
It's not going to be the biggest surprise, but two of the predictions will tie together, and you'll see later on what I mean. I think Ferrari are going to be stronger. I think Ferrari are going to be the best of the rest.
Oh, interesting prediction. I am gonna, and this ties in with my bold prediction as well. I'm just gonna go out and then say it. Gotta go for it. Daniel Ricciardo to be the best
Okay.
surprise this weekend. It would be rude of us not to put Daniel Ricciardo in this mix, given his return to F1. And often we do get drivers when they come back, surprisingly, their first race back, they do tend to take a lot of people by surprise. So, maybe we'll get that with Danny Rick. Maybe that confidence and that excitement is there, something that did seem to leave him at McLaren for some time. We may get something special. We'll have to wait and see. Flop of the weekend. I'm going to go first on this one. Despite our glowing reference for Williams, I'm looking in the direction of Logan Sargent here. Now, with Logan, I think he's been pretty decent. I think a lot of people tried to throw him in the same category as Nick De Vries, but I think you have to remember Logan's situation is a little bit different to Nick. He's a lot less experienced than Nick is, and I think all things considered, I don't think he's done that bad of a job, quite frankly. That being said, the weaknesses of the Williams car is going to be very, very much on show this weekend, and I think Logan's going to struggle as a result to drive around it.
Adam, you've just said my own prediction. I was going to say word for word. So, I mean, thank you because you're right. I think Logan is look whether it sounds horrible. I do think Logan is on raw talent right now. I would say he is the weakest driver on the grid, and you're absolutely right. The Williams' strength is straight line and high speed corners. Hungary is a very different animal in that sense. So I agree. I think Logan Sargent will be the flop of the weekend.
Yeah, it's a bit of a harsh way of putting it. In this regard, I think it's just who's going to struggle the most. You could make a case for Williams, but we know Alex Albon will do his utmost to try and drive
Yeah.
around these issues. And he usually goes well at Hungary, quite frankly. So, he might be able to do something, but I'm not overly confident that Williams are going to have a strong weekend compared to what they had at Silverstone, where they were much more on the pace. So let's do pole position. And Courtney, where are we going pole position?
Right, give me a moment. Max.
Oh, I was worried you're going to be thinking for a long time there. Yeah, I'm going to go Max as well. I don't know why. I tried to be funny with that, but it didn't work. Race winner. Who are we going for race winner?
Max.
Max Verstappen. Yeah, you should put in a bit more exuberance for this. I mean, at the moment, it does seem to be reliability, or perhaps we may get a wet race and we end up with a Bottas T-bone into turn one, like we did a couple of years ago, where he took half of Max's car off. Even if he did that this year, I still think Max will probably be the favourite to win anyway, given how well he's driving. So, yeah, I can't really look past Max to win this Grand Prix. Can you?
No, I think particularly with these upgrades coming, it's gonna be ominous. So I think once again, I don't think we'll see an awful lot of Max on the track. We'll be looking at the battles going on behind him.
Yeah, absolutely. The podium. So this is where it gets a little bit interesting. We actually have to put some thought into these predictions
Yeah.
now. Courtney, who's going to be on your podium this weekend?
Yeah, I'm sticking with my first prediction, and I'm going to say that Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz are going to finish on the podium. I want to add a little bit more spice. We saw things got quite tense between the two drivers at the British Grand Prix, even during qualifying. So I feel the Ferrari are going to be the best of the rest, and I think they will be ahead of their competitors. I feel that there's going to be a tense battle between second and third between Sainz and Leclerc.
Yeah, we're seeing that a lot at the moment with these two, and I think it's the last thing Ferrari need at the moment, because obviously the drivers want to, be the better of the two. They want to outdo each other. They want to beat one another. Ferrari in a situation where they're just, on strategy, they're messing things up, or the car is oversensitive and it can't perform to the level that they are hoping it will. The last thing they need is the two Ferrari guys getting tense and having a fight with one another. There seems to be little moments where it's happening, where it's during the race and the early stints of Austria, where Sainz was moaning that Leclerc was slower than him, although the data suggested that if they'd have swapped the cars around, it wouldn't have mattered. Leclerc would have been faster anyway. And then we had in qualifying in Silverstone, with all that mess that was going on at the end of Q1. So, yeah, it's one to keep an eye on. I don't think it's going to burst into life in the same way that we saw with other teams that have had this issue. I think Carlos and Charles have a very good relationship off the track anyway, where these moments that happen, they're like little tidbits. They're nothing to really worry about boiling over or anything like that. But it's one
Yeah.
Ferrari will have to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I want to elaborate with that 100%. I'm glad you brought it up. I feel that when I say tense, I don't think they're going to collide. Obviously, I've said they're going to finish second or third, but I feel there's going to be a lot of drama on the radio. And as you know, Adam, I love a little bit of radio drama, so I hope it happens.
We all do, don't we? When it sort of comes on, see what's going on. And usually with Ferrari, it's usually filled with drama one way or the other. But, Charles has had some running with teammates before. Sebastian Vettel, they collided a few times. Of course, Carlos. Carlos has not really necessarily been involved in collisions as a teammate, but there was those odd moments early on in his career with Max when they were teammates at Toro Rosso. Renault as well, having some run-ins with Hulkenberg, and McLaren, not so much at Norris, but there was always that battle for supremacy there. So they're no strangers to a bit of teammate rivalry, these two, but I don't really see it boiling over anything like that. I think it would be really stretching if that was the case. My podium, I'm gonna be cautious and go with Perez to get his act together and finish P2. P3, I'm a little torn, but I got to give Ferrari some ups this weekend because I think they are going to be stronger this weekend, and go Charles Leclerc in P3 for that one. Best of the rest. Lando Norris for me.
Lando Norris? I'm going to say George Russell.
Oh, just to clarify, Courtney, best of the rest.
Okay.
So my thought on this one, but for the benefit of those listening, if you are new, best of the rest, this is the category who we think will be the best finisher that isn't in a Red Bull, Ferrari, Mercedes, or Aston Martin. So, Courtney, I'm going to have to push you for another answer.
Okay, I've made a Freudian slip there because subconsciously I'm now putting McLaren in that bracket after their performances in Austria. And so I know we're not quite there yet. Maybe this is me getting carried away. As you said, let's not get carried away. But subconsciously, I'm now putting McLaren in that bracket. But I will answer the question. I'm going to say Piastri, I think Piastri would have been frustrated with how things went in the British Grand Prix. And I feel he's going to come back with a strong performance and be best of the rest.
I like that because with Oscar Piastri, it's very easy for us to lay glowing references and praise to Lando Norris, and rightfully so. I think Lando has been brilliant this season. He always seems to impress us more and more and more. And that performance he put in at Silverstone, the offensive driving, the defensive driving, the one-lap pace, the race pace, it was beautiful. Lovely stuff to see. But Oscar Piastri was with him every step of the way. Hopefully, I don't know if he has the upgraded front wing this weekend. I certainly hope he does, because that's going to really help them out a lot this weekend. And Oscar was right there with Lando. If he'd have had the upgraded car that gave him the delta that Lando had in terms of the advantage, Oscar would have been right there with him. So I'm hoping that continues this weekend because he is a very, very good driver. Mm-hmm. And I'm hoping more people see that in Oscar Piastri. So I like that prediction. I really do. I hope Oscar does well this weekend. And I'm hoping that's the only thing the Australians have to cheer about this weekend for you cricket fans out there. Come on, England. Bold prediction time, Courtney. Let's come to you first on this one. What is your bold prediction?
I thought the Ferrari's been the double Ferrari on the podium. I'm going to go with Daniel Ricciardo. Some people might not even think this is bold. I'm going to go with Daniel Ricciardo out qualifying Sergio Perez in qualifying.
Oh, I like it. That is bold. I mean, because let's be honest, I know Perez is having a bit of a stinker when it comes to qualifying form, but you still, if I was going to predict my front row, I'd still pick the two Red Bulls, even though Perez,
The reason why I think this is, we know that Hungary is the closest thing to a street circuit away from the street circuits themselves. I think traffic can play a big part. And the weather can also be unpredictable there. And I just feel that where Sergio Perez, despite the strengths of that car, seems to be, I'd say, one of the drivers that struggles with original setup more than anyone else on the grid. I feel he's the type of person that could fall victim to the chaos that can sometimes come with a busy qualifying session. So that's why I feel that Sergio Perez, I wouldn't be shocked to see Sergio Perez go out in Q1 again.
Well, it would be a surprise, and I think, it would come at the worst timing given what else is going down at Alpha Tauri this weekend with Ricciardo returning. Obviously, Perez needs to return to form. I said this in the last episode. when I was having a discussion on Sergio Perez. If Perez performs well and performs to the level that Red Bull expect him to, and, you know, even though he's P2 in the Drivers' Championship at the moment, which I think surprised a lot of people when they saw that, probably because they're not interested in the championship right now, given how dominant Max has been. But if Perez is able to pick his form up and finish P2 by some reasonable margin, he's got absolutely nothing to worry about. He will be in that Red Bull next season. That's what Red Bull want, ultimately, I think. If Ricciardo ends up in there, it's a marketer's dream for Red Bull. But they're not going to put him in there unless they're absolutely convinced he's good enough still to drive that car. It just wouldn't happen. It makes no sense to do that anyway. So I have to wait and see. My bold prediction, however, on Ricciardo, because it's Daniel Ricciardo, I'm going to go one further and say he's going to score points this weekend. I'm going to go points finish for Daniel Ricciardo. What a story that would be. It would dominate the headlines if he was to do it this weekend. I'm sure Alpha Tauri would love it if he gets in the points this weekend. I mean, they made a big fuss of him when he returned to the factory at Faenza. It was quite telling, actually, how much they embraced Daniel Ricciardo. It was lovely to see. So, yeah, I'm going to go all in on Danny Rick, point finish.
So do you think he's going to beat Tsunoda?
Well, that's the trick, isn't it? Because that's who he's going to be competing against. I do want to give Tsunoda the benefit of the doubt and say Tsunoda is definitely the favourite at this point in time. But it's Daniel Ricciardo. It's like when Fernando... Well, obviously, you know, Ricciardo and Fernando's careers are very different, and Fernando was much more successful. But I don't think many people were doubting Fernando Alonso's talent when he came back into Formula One. And I think, in a way, it's kind of like when Kimi came back to a degree. You know, all right, Kimi won a world title as well, but there was always that, will he still be fast and stuff? I think I'm going to have faith in Ricciardo to pull it out of the bag. I'm hoping that he's able to leave that poor McLaren form behind and we see the real Daniel Ricciardo return. I'm really hoping, but we'll just have to wait and see, won't we?
Yeah, I think you have a look back at Daniel's career. I think you look back at 2015, 2016, that if Red Bull had the fastest car, Daniel would have been a world champion. You know, I think sometimes it's very easy to look back on drivers and say, oh, he doesn't have a world championship or he has this numbers of world championships. We all know a lot of it comes down to luck when it comes to having the fastest car. So I think it's very easy to downplay Daniel just because he hasn't won a world championship.
Yeah, very, very true. But of course, it's a very hard thing to win a world championship. So you can't be too harsh on Daniel for not having done that just yet. We'll just have to wait and see. But I think that's all we've got time for on this one. Guys, as I mentioned already, get your predictions in. Whether you're listening to us on your favourite audio platform, get over to the YouTube channel, get in the comment section, let us know your predictions. And of course, don't forget to leave us a 5-star review. It really does help us out. And it helps get this podcast out to many more wonderful people that probably haven't heard of us yet. We'd love to increase the DNF1 family. Of course, if you are watching this on YouTube, don't forget to like the video, as always. Subscribe to the channel if you are new, as we are fastly heading to the summer break. But of course, until then, enjoy the Grand Prix this weekend. We'll be back with the review, with a full panel. Mind you, Lee will be returning to the panel this weekend. But until then, guys, thanks for tuning in as always. Please stay safe, and we will see you in the next episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast. And remember, as always, if you're not first, you're probably DNF1. Take care.
See you soon.